Islip. It lies in the heart of Long Island, New York. A team of students is searching for the truth, the historical truth.
You need to, understand your past to understand who you are.
Most middle school students are in the process of learning who they are, and so it makes sense that at this time we would want to learn about our past. And in Excel, we were given the opportunity to do both in the context of a hands-on outdoor program entitled OSSP.
OSSP, Open Space Stewardship Program, is a program where we're working with schools and communities and government agencies to get students outside into their local environment to take responsibilities for properties within their school districts and to begin to do stewardship activities and to collect data that can be useful in developing stewardship plans for the property.
OSSP Excel projects had varied throughout the years.
What kind of projects do students?
Well, students do all kinds of projects. They, for example, at this school district, you've got 2 lakes here right on each side of the school, and some of the students will be taking data on the chemistry of the water and checking on water quality.
The OSSP project for Excel students in 2010 was unique. A group of students working together alongside of Mr. John Lita, Mr. Peter Walsh, and a variety of experts from various fields decided to study the effect that building the Islip Middle School had on the property that it actually sits upon.
The Natural History Project started out with us thinking about how students could track change over time and how they would look at their local environment at the school grounds and start to think about what it looked like in the past and how it got to look the way it does now. We started by taking the students out, having them walk the school grounds, look at the differences that existed between the compacted soil and grasses of the field to the border terrain to the fenced off parts. And then we had the students pick 2 locations in the school. One, there was a disturbed site, so one of those places in the middle of the field, lots of foot traffic, lots of somewhat unnatural surfaces, and then pick another site along the border that was more natural than any of the other sites and as natural as you could be. The first thing that they did was figure out where those spots were on the map. So they got GPS units out, used those to mark one set corner of the research site. They then used compasses so that they could pinpoint that better on a map and find it more quickly in relation to the corner of the building. They then constructed quadrats, which were 2-meter squares that they would then place directly on one corner of their research site, and they used that quadrat as the baseline of how they were going to figure out the biodiversity of that location.
The undisturbed site, it was very natural. There were more plants, much more plants than the disturbed site.
Not many people have disturbed that area, so the plants continue to grow as they would.
For example, some of the plants that we found were onion grass, multiflora rose, scallions,
Common speedwell, and some now seared chickweed.
sassafras tree.
Well, at the undisturbed site, we found more indigenous plant species. We didn't find many weeds or stuff of that nature.
At the disturbed site, there was many weeds and grasses, and it was very run down. It didn't look natural at all.
Plant samples were different because in the disturbed site, there had been many human activity that flattened and squished many of the plants that lived there, that made them die off. And in the undisturbed site, many of the plants had been untouched, uncut, unkept, so that they took over their regular pattern of growth.
The result of a year-long project was impressive. In addition to gathering and preserving identified samples of vegetation using leaf presses, we created a digital field guide on a wiki website to display all of our findings. The scientific pursuit of our history left us craving more though, as our teacher asked us the question of why all of this mattered.
Well, naturally, I think the history of the grounds where the school lies is part of the history of Islip. And
even though a lot of people might not be aware of or interested in the history of our school, it is very important to Islip's history, and we don't want this information to go unsaid. This property did not always look like it does today.
Knowing the history of the property is important. So it's important to know where we are, how we conserve what we have, and what changes might we have to make.
Luckily, the principal was not the only one who cared about the history of our school. Thanks to the support of the Islip Historical Society and Seatuck Environmental Association, the project took an unexpected and unusual turn as the idea for the Excel OSSP Natural History documentary was born.
It could be really interesting to find out what was here before we were.
OSSP students decided not to let their project end with the field guide, but to go further, to ask more questions, and to create this documentary as they pursued finding out more about the history of their school's property.
this is your history too. It's not just the history of the school. It's the history of the town.
Why were we the first students to take on a project like this? Were other kids thinking about our history too? Did other kids know or care?
Maybe they never stopped and thought about the fact that something was here before.
I'm not convinced that children care about the history of the school, but perhaps as they become more educated and more informed, perhaps they will become more involved. I think if kids became more aware and didn't take the things I spoke of for granted, they might care.
Well, we had started thinking about it, and we started thinking about what we could learn about how our geography related to our history.
Islip Middle School is located right on the Great South Bay of Long Island, New York, and we're also located on an outwash plain that was formed by the glaciers thousands of years ago.
To understand the history of Islip and the school here, we need to understand Islip and Long Island's geography.
Long answer. Well, bedrock under Long Island is metamorphic rock, which formed when Pangea originally formed from North America crashing into Europe. That created the Appalachian Mountains, which over hundreds of millions of years eroded, and the sediments washed over into the Atlantic Ocean, creating about 2,000 feet of sediments that are under Long Island. Over time, we had ice ages more recently. They pushed sediments, bring those sediments out in the water, eventually creating the island that we see today.
So perhaps our quest related to even bigger concepts than just our little school here on the South Shore.
I think it's really important to understand the history of Islip Middle School's property. It's got such a wealth of information and a wealth with the natural history about Long Island right here.
In the largest sense, it's a good look at the history of Long Island, history of New York. Well, naturally, I think the history of the grounds where the school lies is part of the history of Islip. And
Islip was bought from the Connecticut tribe in the early 1600s. The Nickel family then had ownership of the land.
It's a great history, and it's a town that was established in the 1600s. It was one of the first towns on Long Island. So it is a very rich history, and it goes back many generations. And we do have families that have been here for generations. So it is something that I feel that once children learn about the history, they appreciate it much more.
The town of Islip, getting its name from Islip, Northamptonshire, England, became a town in 1653. But this was the town's history. We wanted to find about us, our property. To make this possible, research would have to go beyond the internet.
I'm looking through Benjamin Thompson's History of Long Island. I had to get this book from Stony Brook Library.
I'm seeing if these books are the same. This book was printed in the early 1900s, and this book was printed only a couple years ago.
When it came to learning more about a specific parcel of land, such as the one where our school was built, We became history detectives and learned exactly how difficult it can be to get information. We placed innumerous phone calls, interviewed so many people, and often left with unclear answers, conflicting information, or more questions than we had to begin with. Our journey was about to lead us to many places. We would speak to many people. We obtained access to review the historical archives that the school district keeps on file in the grounds and maintenance building. We divided and conquered tasks, researched inside and outside of school, and interviewed as many people as possible. We learned more than just about our school property, but about the development of our school district. In 1795, on April 9th, the Act of New York State Legislature allotted money to Suffolk County for free schools. It was 1812 when towns were divided into school districts on Long Island. In 1825, we see the earliest school inspection record, where Henry Brewster was the first teacher with 36 students. The subjects taught were spelling, reading, writing, arithmetic, English grammar, geography, and surveying. Another date of interest is 1865, when the region's examination system was instituted.
They needed property for a school.
In 1953, Wing School was built. Getting back to our primary objective, the story of our school property specifically, we found answers to some questions after visiting Mr. Gene Murphy at Town Hall.
Okay. Good day. My name is Gene Murphy, and I was the Planning Commissioner for the Town of Islip Department of Planning and Development from 2002 to 2010, and now I work with them as a principal planner, and it's a pleasure to share this wonderful effort by the Excel students of the Islip Middle School.
Mr. Murphy was dedicated to helping us with our project, but we found that our task had many questions which seemed close to impossible to answer.
We did identify through the filed maps. I did go through the SPLEA documents, and there was nothing from the school at all. Okay. We have no certificate of occupancy on record, which doesn't shock me because any building activity goes through the state education department and not the town. On the assessor's office, unfortunately, they had nothing on file. But she is going to go through the old mic. Unfortunately, no specific information about the school property. We have a lot of documents on historic buildings in Islip, but I mean, you have a very, but I'm gathering, while that's interesting to know, I gather that's not the scope of this project. Correct.
It seemed that every door we opened only led to another we needed to discover. Somehow, we ended up finding the right people to help us.
Wonderful woman, Nancy Liebert, who used to teach.
We knew our next move, and we set out to find Mrs. Nancy Liebert.
I'm Nancy Porta Liebert, a lifetime resident of Islip Hamlet.
And we were lucky to have Mrs. Liebert aboard, as it would turn out that she was one of the key people who helped us put together science and history. Mrs. Liebert is far more than a lifelong resident. She's also the humble founder of the Islip Historical Society. And here's the story of how it started.
One person does not start anything. One person might have an idea. I had done with two other local women, Elaine Shilkirka and Martha Ostecki. We did 3 historical slide presentations for the Islip community, and they were so appreciated that everyone started saying, we should have a historical society. We should have a historical society. And Elaine and Martha and I looked at each other and we just didn't feel we could do it. But the idea persisted in the neighborhood. People wanted a historical society. They were excited about learning the kinds of things that you guys are doing about the community, about their hometown. So, in 1992, the Historical Society of Islip Hamlet became a reality.
There were people who cared about history long before we were born, and, as it turns out, we weren't the only Islip students to recognize the partnership between science and history in recent years. Brian Eichner has a similar quest as a high school assignment through the Albany Research Program.
It's good to know like where you come from and like what the history of like where you're living is, because to know if like I just find it interesting to know that what your past of your town is and like what was on where your school is and what like if anybody famous walked the same steps that you did in the same high school.
Brian Eichner granted us that interview in the Excel room at Islip Middle School in the year 2012. Rewind a good 150 years, and we can imagine how the property's history has changed throughout the years.
I grew up in Islip, so I have a personal experience of being in the first 6th grade class that was moved to the new Islip Junior High School at the time, which has now been called the Islip Middle School. It was an interesting time here in Islip. We were able to watch the building start as a swampland of a former estate and grow step by step and to be the big middle school that it is today.
The property has changed hands a number of times through the years.
The story that our research tells us starts in 1820. It was around then that Ebenezer Hawkins owned the property and this mill, a paper mill where paper is manufactured.
My name is Vicki Berger. I served as president of the Islip Historical Society, and I worked for the town of Islip doing historic research. We believe that prior to 1820, the property was owned by Eliphalet Smith, and around 1825, he sold that property to Ebenezer Hawkins and Henry Smith. And when that property was sold, the mill was already established, well established, and the pond was actually called Old Mill Brook at that time, which would also indicate that the mill had been there for a long time, probably even prior to 1820. So what I have here is the actual recorded information that had been recorded with the town of Islip in August of 1825, and this was when Mr. Smith was transferring the property to Ebenezer Hawkins and Henry Smith. And it says, transferring the land along the brook called Orowak or Old Mill Brook, with the land along the brook called Saxton's or Old Mill Brook, with the privilege of damming, ponding, etc. Also, 1/4 part of the paper mill situated on the stream or brook, with equal 1/4 of the dam flues, gates, and machinery to the said mill attached. So what this basically is saying is that Mr. Smith had turned the property over to Ebenezer Hawkins, Henry Smith, a different Smith, and at that time the mill was already established, so they were going to take possession of the property and the business rights to run the old paper mill.
By 1858, we can see that there were 3 houses located on the property. A historical map from the year 1873 shows the paper mill on the property, along with land owned by E. Hawkins and J. C. Cook. By the looks of this map, there were stables and sheds here in 1902, owned by H. S. Jennings and Mrs. M. A. Hawkins.
Okay, what I'm holding is a map that was filed in November of 1906, and it describes property where the Islip High School and Middle School now reside. It's noted as Willow Brook Farm, and Orowak Pond is noted. Just to the west of it is the reason for this map, which is at that time, and even to this day, when people want to develop property, they have to file a map with the county that basically subdivides the property in areas that can be buildable. This was subdivided by a William Moffett.
This document reveals a major change that took place in 1909. An important real estate deal was made here last week when the fine estate of the late P.J. Hawkins sold to William H. Moffett, the real estate promoter. The property consists of about 8 acres of land, 1/2 of Orowak Pond, the Hawkins homestead, and the old paper mill. Apparently, President Grover Cleveland was known to enjoy fishing for trout in Party's Pond, except for then, it was called Paper Mill Pond.
Old-timers, when they hear the word Party Pond, will be able to tell you that at one time it was called something else. It was called Itasca Lake. And we know that from the filed map in 1946 when they were looking to develop the properties along Ocean Avenue. As we can see on that map, it's noted as Itasca Lake. We suspect the reason it became known Party Pond is, as we can also see, the houses on Ocean Avenue, that plot was developed by a man named Roy Pardee. So after he developed it, the name got to be known by him. Now, the other lake is called Orowak Pond, and that's the lake on the west side of the middle school, and that was originally a Willowbrook farm. It appears that that property was never subdivided. It was what is known as described property, and it probably stayed in one ownership until the time when the school bought it.
Party's Pond is also shown on a map dated 1946 as Itasca Lake. The name has changed, and OSSP students have not seen any trout there, but Party's Pond is still appreciated.
This was subdivided by a William Moffett Realty Company in 1906, and Mr. Moffett was one of the first developers in Islip area. Moffett Boulevard is named after him, and he had many, many homes in the Islip area, particularly along the Long Island Railroad between Sunrise Highway, were developed by Mr. Moffett.
So Moffett was notoriously scandalous. With his business with the racetrack and all of his land holdings around here, he ended up going completely bankrupt and owed so many people so much money in this community that the two different versions of the story is that he fled to escape his debts, but the other legend is that he was more likely chased out by everyone that was he had owed money to. So he was definitely quite a scandalous character. He was very vivacious and boisterous, and he was quite a character, but when his business dealings soured, it got really bad and he had to leave.
The property has changed hands a number of times through the years. Its most significant use was when William Moffett, a man who came to this area and bought up an extensive amount of land, Bayshore, Islip, North Islip. His dream was to develop this entire area. In the course of buying up the land and having it subdivided and wanting to sell it to people to build homes, he purchased this property. Then he built what we locals call a mansion. It's a very large stucco house here on this middle school property.
Really?
Yep. And came to live here with his family. He only stayed in the house for 5 years, and in 1915 he sold it to, I forgot his first name, Mr. Oakman.
Mr. Walter Oakman, having bought the property from Moffett, sold it after 3 years to George S. Graham. He made this his summer home and owned it until he died in 1931. In 1941, Mrs. McFadden formerly Marion Graham Williams, owned the property. What we are telling you now is the facts we found, but what you don't know is how difficult it was to gather this information.
This book is volume 2. These are both volume 1, but this is volume 2 of the... This is the older book that was printed in the early 1900s. This book was printed only a couple years ago. And I'm comparing them.
Sometimes history, there's mistakes made, and so...
We received numerous answers that only led us to more questions. This made breakthrough moments all the more exciting. Moments like this one, when we saw for the first time an actual photograph of one of the estates which was here on the property.
Trouble finding pictures of the estate that was once on this property. Could you maybe explain where we could look for one?
I brought one, the only one that I still had for you to see today.
Wow.
Isn't it? It was a pretty house, yes?
Very good.
Yep. And stucco, I believe, and...
The Moffett Mansion was most likely raised in the 1940s.
Sometimes people regret taking down buildings. I have regretted seeing buildings taken down, and so we hope those mistakes aren't made. I don't think it was a mistake to take down the mansion to build a school.
But one of the houses on the property was not destroyed.
So we heard of a rumor that the estate was picked up and moved and that it still occurs today. Do you know if that's true?
Picked up and moved?
To a different location.
No, I really don't.
Wow. You want me to tell how we ended up here?
Yes, I think you should tell the story.
We used to
Meet Audrey and Preston Rayner, the people who live at 86 South Bay Avenue in this house, which used to be here a very, very long time ago.
But now you can tell the history.
It was moved about 1910, and it was so big that they had to cut the limbs off all the trees on Main Street. Mr. Moffett bought it.
This was in the newspaper in the January of '09.
The old mill was built in 1820 by Ebenezer Hawkins, and that was demolished when they moved it.
But they're very poor. But these are the pictures that appeared in the newspaper. And it says Hawkins Homestead purchased by William Moffett, now 86 South Bay Avenue.
The chain of title shows that on December 12, 1947, the property was given as a gift from Marion G. McFadden of Ellendale, Tennessee, to Southside Hospital. It was October 22nd, the year 1953, when the Control Instrument Company of Brooklyn, New York, purchased the property from Southside Hospital, and this historical aerial of the site shows what the property looked like in 1954. On September 22, 1961, it was bought by the Boroughs Control Corporation, then of Wilmington, Delaware. Only 1 year later, Union Free School District No. 2 of the town of Islip purchased the property for $326,300. But it wasn't to buy the middle school, at least, not yet anyway. This satellite image shows the property in 1966, when the high school had been constructed. Here is a historical aerial from 1969. At this point, middle school students went to school at 401 Main Street, what is now currently known as the Old Town Hall Building. Back in the 1960s and 70s, people built without concern or understanding for environmental effects. As the community grew, so did the amounts of construction. The increasing population demanded more classrooms to meet the needs of the community.
Again, growing up here,
it was just so nice. I can see changes that have happened over the course of years, and I love to share them with people. And I think it's important for people to know so they can be proud of it, and they can know what to happen in the future, and things like that.
There wasn't enough room in our existing schools, so they had to build the new junior high to accommodate the influx of students from the population growth in the area.
That is, the school was built in 1971. And prior to that, we were housed in a school on Main Street. I believe it's called 401 Main Street.
The new junior high was very exciting for us. We were housed in what is the Town Hall West.
Books and supplies were moved from the old school to the new school with a less than traditional technique.
And when this school was finished, they took arms full, bags full, boxes full of books, and carried them actually down Main Street to all the kids and delivered the books that needed to be here.
Mrs. Feminella recalls this taking place.
Many of the students from our school had to help transport some of the books from our library to the other library in the new school. We carried our textbooks. We walked down Main Street, really relocating as moving company or moving van didn't show up. The students all helped at the time. I can't picture that happening in today's world, but back then we did walking trips to the new middle school to get the lay of the land, see where our classrooms were going to be, take a tour. It was very exciting. It was an interesting time here in Islip. We were able to watch the building start as a swampland of a former estate and grow step by step into be the big middle school that it is today.
While the site has changed, and it is now impossible to tell that the site of our school used to be so very different, there are still remnants if one looks close enough.
And where the flagpole stands now is two gargoyles that came from the mansion.
Historical markers are located throughout the town, revealing to observers who will take the time to stop and read what used to be on the ground they stand on.
Let's dig up the facts about these historical places, because you have to do research. You can't be putting up these historic signs. You've seen our historical signs, the blue and gold, the markers.
Digging up the facts is both literally and figuratively what we set out to do, both scientifically and historically. A year after the OSSP Natural History Project concluded, we returned to the site of our research, and we were speechless when we saw construction taking place to remove all of the vegetation from the border of Orawak Lake, the quadrant representing the undisturbed parcel of land only 1 year ago. We couldn't think of why people would be cutting down trees like this in the year 2012, so we requested to speak with Mr. Dan Letty from the Grounds and Maintenance Department to learn more.
Hi, I'm Dan Letty.
So what do you do here at Islip Middle School?
I'm the Plant Facilities Administrator. I take care of buildings and grounds for the district.
Oh.
We found that you had some invasive species that were choking a lot of the trees. So for safety measures, so the kids wouldn't get hurt, we cut down the unsafe trees.
It was amazing to us to see how much a property could change in the course of only 1 year.
Unfortunately, due to the choking and the rotting of the wood, there wasn't much good lumber that you could actually take.
We create changes to our environment for all sorts of reasons. The ground on our disturbed quadrant of land was so compact that it is almost impossible to drive a stake into it. The plants here are extremely yellowed and small, and compared to the undisturbed site, this area was barren. This change to the land was due to high traffic of people walking over it. It was ironic to see the undisturbed property changed for such a different reason.
Most of its debris we've chipped up, the stuff which will, it's spread out and then it will naturally disintegrate back into the earth.
Take a step back and look at the big picture. If a site like this changed that much in 1 year, think about how much has changed in almost 300 years. The site most likely looked nothing like the disturbed or undisturbed sites back then. It probably looked more like this. Seeing the changes that could occur in only 1 year inspired our project even more. We had learned to appreciate what occurred here before our lifetime. When all research was done, we were left with more questions than answers, but we had also obtained a thirst for history. No matter how many answers we get, we'll always be hungry for more.
Knowing all history is important.
And if you recall, the story of this property started back with the old paper mill, built in 1820. This is also where our story ends, as our compiled research was deemed worthy of the placement of a historical marker.
We're also looking into getting a historical marker for the sawmill that was on our property.
Describe what you're doing and saying that, you're working with the town of Islip, and there was a process of getting historic markers that we know goes through this state office. We believe in Albany.
This means a lot to me because this will be here long after I will be here.
To be involved in a program like this is a great experience. It opens your eyes to things that you have never thought of before. It also makes you feel part of the community.
I find it very exciting to be a part of the installation of this historical marker. It is very important to me to think that many years in the future, people will recognize our work and appreciate it as much as I do.
Once we started, though, I realized how much I was able to learn, and creating a documentary is not easy. Many days I wanted to give up because I thought it was just too hard. The process of making a documentary isn't like you just film some stuff, find some facts, edit, and boom, you have a documentary. It's extremely messy, and most of the time things don't add up. If Ms. Johnson didn't keep me motivated or focused, the documentary wouldn't have been done, and we wouldn't be here to see this beautiful sign installed. Though many times I doubted myself in this documentary, there is no better feeling than being able to say you took part in a creation everyone is able to see. Thank you to Mrs. Johnson and the rest of the OSSP team for giving me this opportunity.
I can't believe I'm sharing this wonderful moment with all of you. I'm so glad I've had the opportunity to work on this project, and it's so exciting that all our hard work is now paying off. This historical marker will not only be here and be appreciated for us today, but will be appreciated for generations in the future. I hope that students then will be able to think about what was here before and enjoy learning the rich history of Islip Middle School.
This is an amazing accomplishment that I will always remember and be proud to have been a part of. I hope that many people in the future will read this sign and become intrigued by Islip's rich history.
Now, forget about 300 years in the past. Think about 300 years in the future. What might the site look like then? The answer is up to you, your children, and their children. How will you choose to change the world we live in? Or should I say, how will you choose not to? The choices you make every day reflect what kind of world you want to see, and they are up to you. After learning about the history of our school and our town, I think the students of this project have a clear idea of what we want for the future of our world. Maybe change isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Maybe there is more to be said for not changing.
You know, we always say if you need to, you know, understand your past to understand who you are. Most students in general really do want to understand how things are and why things are and what came before. A documentary like this would pique their curiosity. Maybe they never stopped and thought about the fact that something was here before. A document like this serves a good purpose to open that door. Obviously, documentaries and things like that are the ultimate form of primary sources. You're creating a document. You're creating something for someone else to learn from. So I think that's great.
Do you think the land the school sits on is important?
Absolutely. This is land that has been here for a long, long time, and it's
Do you think the land the school sits on is important?
Not really, no.